Okay, hello. We're testing this DMOC445 at higher voltages. According to the data sheet here, we are good up to 400 volts is the maximum operational voltage. Max recommended is 336 volts DC, and I guess the university is running this as they've got 100 calobs in series, which puts it at nominal voltage about 360 volts. So we're trying to figure out if that's what's causing it. Contactor to click out. Now, unfortunately, my battery pack here only goes up to 288 volts. So, you'll notice there's this little tiny capacitor down here. Well, it's not really tiny, but 1000 microfarad capacitor. And yeah, that's a bridge rectifier on top of it with a 10K bleed resistor that is connected in series with the battery pack, and it goes up to a variac. And that is plugged in, so I can change this and we can give it more or less voltage, thus enabling us to go to higher than 288 volts. I try to come up with an easy way to do it. I really need to sit down. I have all the parts to do it. I just need to build a bidirectional buck boost converter, so then I can have a much smaller battery pack and then be able to do these kind of tests. In the future, it'll eventually happen. So, let's see here. I've switched out from these cheap crappy meters because I don't really trust these leads at these higher voltages. So I've got my Cat 3 voltmeter over here. I've got Windows magnifier running, so it's just magnifying this little section right here. 272 volts and 272.8, so we're within 0.8 of a volt. So that's close enough. It is actually up and running right now. And so one of the things we wanted to test was going to 360 volts. So unfortunately the variac is way over on the other side, so I'm going to move this over here carefully. There you go, so now I can see what I'm putting in. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this up to 360 volts. A little high. Close enough. So now we're at 361 volts. We'll wait. And what's interesting is you'll see the voltage here is still coming up, and this bit right here is caps charged. Until that turns 1, it won't let me turn the contactors on or off. So now that that's a 1, it'll let me turn on the contactor. And so we'll go ahead and flip this on, and it obviously works at 360 volts. I can even give it a little put it in gear here, and then give it a little throttle. So that's obviously working, 360 volts. So that's not the problem. But what was interesting is, well, I guess one thing that's interesting, according to the data sheet here, 400 volts is the max. And it does seem to actually honor that. So if I turn this up to 400 volts, actually I gotta go a little bit above 400 volts. So let's say like there. And we come back over here, we're up to 406 volts. Contactor's closed, caps are charged, everything's good. And then if I tell it to, oh, it's already enabled, so if I try to tell it to give it, if I try to give it throttle, nothing happens, it won't go. So if it's above 400 volts, it definitely disables itself, but the contactor will still open and close. So I can close, so that's still working up at 400 and, what are we at, 407 volts. So that definitely still works. One interesting thing is if I have the contactor closed or open in this case, if I turn this back down, so let's turn this back down to, say, let's go back down to 360 volts. and I do it pretty quickly. So we're in the 350 volt range. And then I come over here, you can see that this is still discharging, and it says the caps aren't charged. So if I come over here and try to flip it on, nothing happens. The contactor won't click in until it says the caps are charged, and then it'll work. So I thought that was very interesting. So they just have a very, 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 very slow pre-charge resistor on this. And the same thing happens if it's off, and of course I go and crank up the power to, you know, just went really rapidly. Nothing will happen, and I can just leave it on, and then as soon as this voltage gets up there, it'll click in. So as soon as it reached 360 volts, which is what I set this to over here, we ended up kicking in. So I'm wondering if that's part of the problem. If you regen over 400 volts, the drive will cut off, but the contactor doesn't open. So I'm not quite sure how. Not quite sure how to replicate the problem, because I can go. It actually does run up to higher voltages. You can see right here the max on charge voltage is 450 volts DC. Well, that's a really good rating, since the caps inside the drive only get to 450 volts. I would have had a lot more margin than that. But if it gets above 400, it won't attempt to charge up the caps, so the pre-charge gets turned off. So I guess that's how they're protecting that. But other than that, it seems to work perfectly fine. I've got it dialed in 360 volts, and it definitely turns on and off pretty good. So I'm not seeing any issues with that. It even clicks in at 400 volts. So if I turn this up, I mean, it can be really close to us. So 395. I can flip it on. We're still waiting for the caps to charge, so I'll just turn this on here. And they're at 388, 389, 390. There it goes. So now we're at 396. And it's on, and it still works. And I can give it some throttle. Oop, I went forward. Oh, I am in forward. Give it some throttle here. And she starts spinning. So it seems like everything works unless you go slightly above 400 volts. Then motion won't occur, but it lets you click it in and out. So if I turn it off, and if I crank this up to, say, 400 and let's go with 420 volts. If I click it on, we have to wait for it to charge up. Still at 412, 413, 414, 415. There it goes. So it still lets you engage the contactor even up at 420 volts, but it won't let you spin the motor. There's nothing happens. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what to make of that. I can't recreate the issues that you guys were having with the contactor clicking out. I just haven't been able to replicate it. So yeah, I guess that's it. Thanks.